Good morning to you, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Los Angeles, California, United States of America, March 27, 2021, talking on behalf, speaking up for the heroic women and men, girls and boys, nuns and monks in the beloved country of Myanmar in Burma. Today, at this very moment, continuing into the second month, near the end of the second month, a remarkable act of conscience, if you will, conscience in dynamic action. Many intellectuals and leading thought leaders in the country of Norway nominated the civil disobedience movement, CDM, in Burma for the Nobel Peace Prize. 3 fingers up worldwide for this heroic acknowledgement of the courage of the people, the 54 million people at this very moment, struggling in their own defiant acts of conscience to overcome Masak, the latest designated terrorist organization on planet Earth. Ming Online State Administration Council, Masak, the acronym for Burma's present-day Taliban, Khmer Rouge, Boko Haram, Ming Online, known today as Burma's Saddam Hussein. No longer a representative, point 2, of the sacred institution. I want to draw a very clear delineation here, which Daw Aung Suu Kyi has done, everyone who's a thought leader in the country of Burma and around the world, a huge delineation between the Thamada, the Burmese word for the armed forces, founded by the heroic independence leader, Daw Aung Suu Kyi's father, General Aung San, a noble institution designed to protect the people, obviously not to persecute, kill, and tragically, on Armed Forces Day in Burma yesterday, March 27, 2021, in honor of General Aung San, the institution that he founded killed close to 90 women and men, boys and girls, some of them assassinated with high-powered rifles outfitted with silencers. Deep terrorism has infiltrated the country of Burma. And this is the point. The Thamada no longer exists. It is now a terrorist organization and should be labeled appropriately worldwide by all leaders, all ambassadors, everyone in the world who has a regard for democracy, the universality of freedom, rule of law, should acknowledge that the former military, the armed forces, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force in Burma, known as the Thamada, acknowledged yesterday on Armed Forces Day, the day of its founding by the heroic independence leader, Daw Aung Suu Kyi's father, General Aung San. It is no longer the Thamada. It is a terrorist organization purely based upon looking visually through endless videos and still images and the universality of the media that has documented the evidence for over 2 months, plus decades of violence, tyranny, and unremitting terror upon the peaceful, loving people of Burma. I had a very interesting conversation last night with a long-time friend from Myanmar, Burma. I'm not going to say a lot about him. He's an elder statesman. He's much older than Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, a very beloved friend of hers, and a very close ally of many of her friends and mentors, spiritual teachers. His father was a very respected leader in the initial civilian government of Burma back in the day. He comes from a very prominent family. We haven't spoken in 3 years, but we were very close friends when I first met him when I went to Burma in the late 1970s. We are brothers in democracy. We are brothers in Dhamma. His father was a deep friend of Sir U Twin, the founder of the Mahasi Thatanayekta in Rangoon, where I lived. I was blessed to live there as a monk for a short period of time, close to 4 years. I was a student of the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw. My friend, his father was a very close friend of the first Prime Minister, U Nu. He comes from a deep, engaged political background with a long-standing root, if you will, limbs and roots in the timeless teachings of the Buddha, known worldwide throughout history as Dhamma. He is my Dhamma brother, a mentor, a friend, an ally, a guide, a teacher. He is a long-time Satipatthana Vipassana meditator. He has gone deep in his meditative practice. He's practiced the samatha methods of concentration and jhana. He's practiced under Mahasi Sayadaw, under U Sujata, under Sayadaw U Pandita, and went very, very deep. Very humble man. He is old. He is diseased. He is dying. We had over a 2-hour conversation last night that was very, very illuminating for me and he as brothers in democracy and Dhamma. Thank you for allowing me to introduce him to you and to the people of Burma. The relevance is, as I'm trying to share today, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's call, if you will, in her written statement before her arrest, calling for the nation to oppose the injustice of this military coup, calling for civil disobedience. I'm making the point here. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi cannot speak for herself right now. We know that she's alive. We don't know exactly where she is, but we do know at 75 years old, she is the heroine, one of the great leaders of Myanmar. Her civilian government has now been in operation for nearly a decade. Sadly and tragically, they are now either in hiding and or in jail or in insane prison. She called for active nationwide civil disobedience. I'd like to read this statement that was read by also her deep, long-standing colleague, U Win Tain, who now also is in prison at 80 years old in a wheelchair without his medicines, a very beloved friend of mine along with his family. But he made the comment very clearly upon his arrest, just prior to his arrest, a couple of things I think it's worthy to note for the world to remember, that in the nomination of the CDM movement, Civil Disobedience Movement, not only is Daw Aung San Suu Kyi the visionary, the encouraging voice to activate the CDM movement among the heroic women and men right now for 2 months, many of them who have been killed, tortured, disappeared. It was she, through U Win Tain, in a written statement that said, hey, it's time to act in conscience to oppose the injustice of this military terrorist coup. But I want to make a couple of points about that, but I want to read the quote first. She says, I urge the people not to accept the coup. Daw Aung San, I urge the people not to accept the coup by the military and resist it resoundingly. I urge the people not to accept the coup by the military and resist it resoundingly. At the time you are reading this statement, she goes on to say, The military has abolished the elected parliament and government for which the public unanimously voted, ignoring the Constitution that they themselves drafted. Important statement. At the time you are reading this or hearing it, the military, Masak, the former Thamada, the military has abolished the elected parliament. Abolished here, they have abolished and they have imprisoned and they have terrorized, they have poisoned and tortured to death elected members of the parliament. Abolished here is tyrannized now for close to 2 months, for which the public unanimously voted, ignoring the 2008 Constitution that they, the Thamada, drafted. Utter hypocrisy made real on the stage of the world to see. U Win Taint says, oppose this coup as much as you can. He's now quoting and paraphrasing Daw Suu, his colleague. Oppose this military coup as much as you can in a non-violent way. I want to get into this a bit more because I spent a lot of time with Daw Suu, U Win Taint, U Win Tin, U Tin U, U Wei Mong, U Chi Mong, Seda U Pandita, talking about non-violence, civil disobedience, civil, Sila-oriented disobedience, conscientious disobedience, conscious Dhamma disobedience, Dhamma-infused disobedience, non-participation. On the one hand, and the more elevated expression, which I talked to Daw Suu endlessly about, the more elevated expression of the CDM movement isn't just to oppose or to withdraw, but it's actively transforming the so-called oppressor. I want to get into that. But U Win Taint read before he was jailed, oppose this military coup as much as you can, again paraphrasing Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, in a non-violent way, as called for, he said, by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. I want the world to really know that. We all know it in Burma, but few people around the world are drawing the connection between what the Nobel people in Oslo in Norway, I think it was 8 intellectuals that nominated her unanimously, that nominated the civil disobedience movement unanimously for the Nobel Peace Prize, and the integral, inseparable connection, not just to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi calling for it, all elected leaders whom she's speaking for, which is one of her raison d'etres. I don't speak alone. I speak for the civilian elected members of parliament and the people who voted for us, 86% of the population. On top of, since she came back to Burma, 1988, to be with her dying mother, and for 17 years detained under house arrest, imprisoned for a few months here and there, along with the thousands of other men and women who spent endless years of their lives away from family, tortured, interrogated, persecuted, in insane prison and the 36 or 7 other gulags around the country. They always kept CDM. And I want to point right here. CDM in the earliest days that I remember wasn't an acronym for civil disobedience movement alone. It was civilian dialogue movement. Civilians. Aung San Suu Kyi, the NLD, founded by U Tin U, U Win Tin, U Chi Mong, and others, they were civilians. We all know that in 62, Ne Win, Tan Shui and Masak, or Ming Online's grandfather or great-grandfather in dictatorship, they were military, they were Thamada, they were armed forces. Now they're dictatorial terrorists. So on the one hand, we had the military. On the other hand, we had civilians. So I'm pointing here, civilians is not a new term in Burma. It's a very clear contrast, like peace in a storm, stillness in a tsunami, light and dark, civilian and Tamada or military or SLORC or State Administration Council. Now, these are acronyms, not for military or Tamada. These are acronyms for terrorism. So the opposite of terrorism in a uniform has always been civilian since the time of Ne Win back in 62 to 2021. A civilian dialogue. This is a very important point for me, and I hope you really, well, to those who know it, bear with me. To those who need to be refreshed, stay alive in this. But what brought me to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi? Let me just back up. I had been in the country up until 84 when I was thrown out by Ne Win. I had been a monk. And I came back into the country underground. I think it was just after 88, 89, after the revolution. And I wanted to see for myself, my teachers, my Dhamma friends, my sister nuns, what's going on here? And I learned firsthand the violation of human dignity, the violation of the human body through the weapon of the Tamada, the military. I'd never witnessed this kind of thing. And I went out to the hinterlands when the election in 1990 was taking place, the bogus, unfair, and unfree election that resulted in an overwhelming civilian victory, that the result of which were not only not honored by Tan Shui, anyone elected was hunted, tortured, imprisoned, and or fled the country along with Dr. Sein Win. And I met he and many of the elected members of the parliament in 1990 out in the Karen area of the country, in Manipur, where I spent numerous months over many different visits, talking with ABSDF members and the NCGUB, the parallel government that was formed out there in Manipur, with the heads of the KNU in Shan State, and really dove into, for me, the first time in my life, up close, the distinction between civilian and military, dialogue and destruction. That's my point. Civil disobedience is civil, dana, sila, bhavana-oriented, dhamma disobedience that is diametrically opposed to the fist, the gun, the cannon, the jet, the drone, the torture, the persecution, the coercion, the terror today that we see metastasizing so viciously out of Naypyidaw with Masak. But there, I saw many hundreds of students in the ABSDF that took up armed resistance. And I really questioned, this is long before Daw Aung San Suu Kyi won the Nobel Peace Prize, but jump time back when she was arrested and she was released, she had won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 for her nonviolent, her civil disobedience, her revolution of the spirit, the non-participation in violence, the feminine-inspired occupation of conscience, using voice and ideas to confront the tyranny of dogma, totalitarianism, and dictatorship. Civil disobedience, restrain and engage. And what I learned from her when we met in 95 and we did our book together called The Voice of Hope, a set of dialogues with U Tinu, U Chi Mung, and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and I was blessed to meet hundreds of other people close to her. We examined through many hours of dialogue the nature of civil disobedience. We examined what she talked about, civilian dialogue. That's what we do, Alan. We are civilians. We are citizens without the uniform that my father created as an institution that was sacred to the country to achieve independence from the tyranny of the white supremacists and the invading Japanese fascists. A sacred institution for the people, with the people, in support of the people, honoring of the people, and having the good honor of the people towards them. That was my father's vision. That was the early days of the Thamada. What we're doing here in confronting dictatorship and confronting totalitarianism and confronting the use of the weapon is the power. This is what really excited me about Daw Suu and the NLD and about the other leaders and my own involvement with it through Dhamma teachers. It was the power of taking Dhamma out of yekta, out of monasteries, off of cushions, expanding the meaning of sati into a mindful, intelligent radiance where we use the power of speech, auditory vibration. When we talked, she said, Alan, your teacher, my teacher, the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita taught me the power of using conscious speech as a transformational weapon. Really pointing here to how she unpacked civil disobedience and that movement from the earliest incarnation, if you will, of the CDM movement to civilian dialogue movement, a nationwide movement that is empowering dialogue over death, tyranny, dictatorship, and terrorism. That's what drew me to Burma, to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and that's why she won the Nobel Peace Prize. But few people really understood, I think, worldwide, the infrastructure, if you will, the mindful intelligence, the fabric, the ecosystem of what civil disobedience moves and how it operates. We all know a little bit about Gandhi, and I think it was Satyagraha. What did I wrote it down here? Satyagraha. The holding firmly to truth. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, although she can't speak for herself, if I were to, read things that she told me from our books and times together on the tapes and videos, holding satya, the power of truth infused with karuna and metta, loving kindness and compassion, and letting the radiance of our thought be expressed through the power of speech. Speaking truthfully, Alan. I know these words deep in my heart. I've said them so many times over the decades. We must be firmly rooted in satyagraha, firmly rooted in truth. The timing of that expression, the tone. She was so rad with the right word at the right time, in the right tone, with the right space, in the right context, being unintimidated by fear, persecution, and terror, and not being attached even to the outcome. Point 3 here, very important for me, around civil disobedience movement, CDM, that's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. They will win, because the people will win. But also to remember the first incarnation of CDM was CDM, Civilian Dialogue Movement. That's the ethos of the parliament. That is the ethos of the NLD. They use the power of the feminine, the voice, the power of action, the power of restraint, no longer engaging in tyranny and violence as a way to control or to elevate the status of the country and to the people. Non-violent, non-cooperation. The word transformation here, I think, is very important. At least it's been for me. I never really heard this except when I learned from Sayadaw U Pandita, my Dhamma teacher, my meditation teacher. And many of you know that he was the principal advisor to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, U Tin U Chi Mong, U Win Tain, numerous other leaders within the civilian dialogue movement, the civil disobedience movement, and the NLD, and the parliament, until he passed away at 96 back in 2016. He really was, in my humble estimation, which you can read about firsthand in our book together, a book of conversations called Wisdom for the World, a book he titled, and Mindful Advice for the People of My Country. He really unpacked for the people a book pretty much brought forth for Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, really, about the power of reconciliation that he called the Dharma or the Dhamma of reconciliation, which is another synonym phrase for the civil disobedience movement, but it comes back to the word transform. He wasn't just in resisting through non-cooperation. We no longer are going to be doctors and nurses in the hospitals. We're no longer going to be teachers in the universities and the schools. We're no longer going to be civil servants within the civil servants movement. We're no longer going to be participants in the military. We're putting down our weapons. We're belonging and joining the civil disobedience movement. We no longer want to be a part of the police force. We're joining the CDM movement. All shops, cafes, manufacturing, we are belonging, joining the CDM movement. We're belonging to the civilian dialogue movement, the civil disobedience movement. The ethos is to transform the evil from the mind of the dictator. And all the mindset of dictatorial consciousness throughout the country. Transformation is the word here. And she would tell me very adamantly that our role is not to demonize. This is a very delicate role, and I could easily be, a victim to my own delusion about this, because it's easy for me to point fingers and to get angry and to judge and to label and to vilify. Whereas from her point of view and her encouragement, both to me and to many thousands of people that I watched her talk and interrelate to firsthand over the many years, not to vilify, not to demonize, not to denigrate. The distinction? Point out the flaw in their thinking, point out the flaw in their behavior, but allow for the possibility of redemption. I don't know the Buddhist Pali word for this, but I know symbolically it's most contained in the epic or archetypal story of Angulimala, and we all know that who are students of the Buddha, the serial killer, the terrorist at the time of the Buddha, who demanded as the 1,000th victim of his massacre, his spree of terrorism, was to take the life of the Buddha, and he stalked him, very much like Ma Sak is stalking the people right now. And the Buddha was said to have told Angulimala, who shouted at the Buddha, "Stop. Essentially, I want to look you in the eye as I assassinate you. I want to kill you, either with sword, saber, knife, or strangulation, I'm not sure." And the Buddha made eye contact, I'm just playing it out here, with Angulimala. He made eye contact with Masak. He made eye contact with terror. He made eye contact with Angulimala, and he embodied his CDM, civilian, Dhamma-oriented communication with evil. And right there, that matrix between good and evil, the Buddha and Angulimala, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and Masak, the people and the terrorizers at the moment. That contact, that matrix, what do we do there? That's the CDM movement in dynamic action. That information exchange is how intelligent we are as individuals, as members of the CDM movement, both civilian dialogue movement as well as civil disobedience movement. Remember that we restrain from harsh speech, we restrain from vilification, and the transformational opposite is to engage with active, weaponized metta. my term, active, weaponized karuna, compassion, active, weaponized, modernized Dhamma, active, weaponized, mindful, intelligent CDM with Angulimala, face to face. What will I say? And the Buddha was said, stop. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi refused to see Angulimala as unredeemable, creatively engaging the evil, on the one hand through restraint of anger and judgment and blame, or to pick up a stone or a stick or a knife or an AK-47 or a jet and obliterate the mind, the head, the body of Masak. Very big distinction. The absence of violence within the CDM movement, the active component is, again, I use the word, radicalization of disobedience, radicalization of the word civil. We're inventing, you're inventing on the front lines, and you're inventing the new intelligence, not looking back at Gandhi, not looking back at Martin Luther King, not looking back at Thich Nhat Hanh, not looking back anywhere, even to the teachings of the Buddha, except what is the mindful Dhamma, trans-religious intelligence that can be brought to the forefront here, that the nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize is the most exciting expression of nonviolent, weaponized disobedience in the face of terror that we've ever seen. That's Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's encouragement from behind bars right now. Activate, weaponize, increase the radiance, increase the creativity, increase the intelligence of the dialogue, of the disobedience, of the unwillingness to participate in evil. And this is the concluding point here. And what a challenge it is to be spit at, slapped, have your friend, your lover, your wife, your daughter be shot, killed, raped, and not to demonize and vilify and want to blow the head off of a terrorist, cut the throat off. My friend last night, I'll close. We communed in a very sacred place because we share many, many years of deep meditative Dhamma-oriented silence together and communion with remarkable teachers. We have a fidelity, I would only say, roots deeply in the psychic intuitive. We all know that who've been meditators, that we are not just simply surface thoughts that arise, and we're not just simply confined to the ecosystem of anatomical being. We're more than our minds, we're more than our bodies. We're an ecosystem, what seems to be of an unlimited root system, where the word samsaric sangha, people that we've known, individuals throughout time immemorial, as the Buddha was said to have said that we talked about last night, long have you suffered the loss of loved ones and teachers and friends and mothers and fathers. Through the persecution of terrorists, you fill the oceans with more tears than 4 great oceans combined, more blood. But the reverse of that isn't so much about sorrow alone, but think about, as the Buddha was said to have said, rare is it to meet someone in this eternal samsara that hasn't formerly been your mother, your brother, your lover, your sister, your teacher, your guide, your best friend, your Dhamma sister, your Dhamma brother. You belong to an infinite allegiance of alliances, and he and I resonate, as I have about 4 or 5 people in my life that I would call samsaric sangha family. Very few. And so we commune in intimate psychic ways. And he and I went there last night in a co-exploration And I asked him, from the deepest places of your abinya, from your psychic understanding, from your deep intuition of history in Myanmar, what do you see? Burma is already in a liberation process permanently within the world of anicca. But permanently, Masak will be defeated and gone, and I predict in not too long a time that Ming Online, who is already making preparation, he said, to take he and his family to China. He knows it's over. He's looting the banks, he's taking all the jewels and gold that he can, and the few people, perhaps his wife, his daughter's already there, who just recently had a baby, and I was told that the baby was born with a hole in its heart. I can't corroborate that, but my friend told me it's fact. And he's making plans at this time. Hear me, Alan. He's making plans to escape to China. He knows it's over. Thus, his murderous rampage is ignorance out of control. It's not about the attempt to control. He's terrorized, and his natural Dhamma instinct is to terrorize. I found that remarkably compelling, remarkably hopeful. And I wanted to share that with you with an elder statesman from Burma who is a beloved friend and whose father was a super respected statesman, dear friend, colleague of the first Prime Minister, U Nu, and the founder of one of the most prestigious meditation centers in the world, Sir U Twin, donating land in Rangoon for the Mahasi Thatanayekta, which has 660 branches alone in Burma, 5,000 monasteries, 500,000 monks and nuns in Burma. We concluded with this statement. The people, he said, have never been more unified in decades. The ethnic armed organizations, the Kachins, the Shan, the Mons, the Karins, and many others, they are at this very moment, we know that, forming, negotiating, talking with a direct motivation to unify. Stand in armed solidarity. And he predicts that that unification of a federal freedom fighters unified liberation army is not only in the making, has already been developed, and is now looking at strategic ways to engage the former armed forces of Burma, known as the Thamada, but it's no longer the Thamada. It is a terrorist organization known by Masak, an acronym for the Khmer Rouge. And Ming Online is synonymous today with a Bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, Pol Pot. He's a terrorist. The criminal court is one thing, whether he'll go there or not, it's hard to know. But he knows his only escape is from his major funder in armaments, in oil, in money, and in collusion, the unwillingness of the dictatorial, genocidal, nuclear-armed premier of China, Xi Jinping, and in some way Putin of Russia, but primarily of the genocidal, nuclear-armed premier of China, Xi Jinping, with the persecution of the Uyghurs, the Muslims, the organ harvesting, the forced abortions of women in China up to 9 months, the ongoing decimation of the Tibetan Plateau and the people of Tibet, the absolute decimation of the democracy movement in China in '89 with Tiananmen Square, the decimation of the democracy movement in Hong Kong, the ongoing persecution of the people of Hong Kong and the family members of those revolutionaries in Hong Kong, in mainland China? He's evil. And he's a brother, a father, an ally, a colleague of Mossack. He funds them. He turns a blind eye. He refuses to participate in the language of even calling it a military coup, much less a terrorist group. My point is, Mossack knows his only hope is to hide under the black evil cape of his genocidal brother, Xi Jinping, in China, and he is making preparations for that at this very moment. Here, in closing, his final encouragement, which has been really deep in my heart, in speaking on behalf of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi in an unauthorized statement, reiterating her words, oppose this military coup d'etat. A million different variations of civilian dialogue, Dhamma-infused disobedience. A million variations of civilian disobedience movement. May the people of Burma, in collusion, in fear with Mossack, the terrorist group, one by one, family by family, may those people find the moral courage, the Dhamma intelligence to withdraw their relationship with terrorism and refuse to participate in the ongoing terror of their own people. Whatever that may mean, close your shop, refuse to sell the Sangha, refuse to ordain members of the military, friends of the military, refuse to take dana. There must be a list of those Gen X and Gen Z people out there. I would encourage, if there is a list in Burmese, please translate it or send it and have it in English. But compile a list, as I said the other day, the ecosystem of evil. Who are these men and women of Mossack? Let us go to a central source and build it out with photographs, with their Twitter handles, with their Facebook pages, with their emails, their phone numbers, their license plate numbers. The companies that do business with Mossack around the world, the banks. Let's find out who the bankers are. Let's find out who the hedge fund managers are. Let's find out who the arms manufacturers and dealers are. Let us know in one simple website who these people are. And on the other hand, let us also compile a list of the variations of displaying civil disobedience. Let the people who are still in complicity or collusion or in fear of, if I only belong to the people's movement, I will suffer. Convince them in different ways of acts of conscience. Remember that the civil disobedience movement is really the empowerment of conscience, the agency of an ethical intelligence over the tyranny and the delusion of violence through terrorism. That's the dichotomy. Give these people a Dhamma or mindful ABC, easy to read and understand education on the pros and cons right now of belonging to that which has been elevated worldwide now, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, civil disobedience, the CDM movement, formally brought forth by Daw Suu and elected members as the civilian dialogue movement. And furthermore, she as the voice. I urge you, my people, not to accept the military coup and resist it resoundingly. She gave voice. Go for it. At the time you are reading this statement, and U Win Taine read this, that she left before she was incarcerated, the military has abolished the elected parliament. This was back in February 1st. Look what's happened in 2 months. The unremitting tyranny, the assassinations, the torture, the persecution, and the luminosity of the CDM movement going to new heights of freedom. At the time you are reading this statement, the military has abolished the elected parliament and government for which the public unanimously voted. They're taking that away from you, the people, ignoring the Constitution that they themselves drafted. Let us see all the ways that civil disobedience can manifest, all the different sectors of the country. Show the nuns and monks 10 different ways to join the CDM movement. Show the teachers that are still teaching Masak's children how to stop teaching, the wisdom of ceasing to teach, and the wisdom of joining the CDM movement. That intelligence, that ecosystem to confront the ecosystem of evil. Let us go to websites and see, as foreigners outside of Burma, all around the world, let it be translated into Swede, German, French, Spanish, all the various languages around the world. Let us see who are the people doing business, colluding with the evil terrorist group Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda organization, the Khmer Rouge, the Boko Haram of Burma today. They're not in armed forces. That is an illegal action to collude with terrorism. Banks, lumber, jewel, cars, manufacturing, garments. Let us go to one central site and see who they are. The websites, their names, the board of directors. Boycott. Let the whole world join in a resounding elevation of a global CDM movement. Let us in the world join you, people of Burma, and let the world outside join the people of Burma by helping them through funds, through intelligence, through food, through medicines, through moral support, so that the whole world has a chance to rise up and let the world equally rejoice in the celebration and the victory that's guaranteed of the Nobel Peace Prize in December of this year, instigated way back in '62 when the civilians of the country were taken over by the first dictator, Ne Win, 62 to 2021. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, U Chi Mung, U Tin U, U Win Tin, Minko Nine, Koko Ji, Matira, Momo Myat, Chezwa, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians since '62 have sacrificed their lives, their time, their money, tears and blood for this second great independence movement started by General Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's father. Let the whole world join the CDM movement in Burma today and isolate Masak. Find 1,000, 10,000 ways to join the movement by divesting all money, time, and energy in corporations and businesses. And Ming Online, if you're watching this, and may the people who do watch this video send it worldwide. Share it, share it, share it. Be a force multiplier, especially within Burma, especially to the military, especially to Masak, to leaders, to President Biden, everywhere. Go to China now. Spare persecution and execution. Take your wife, go meet your daughter there, take your son, any of the cronies that want to go with you, go in your private jet, take your rubies and your money, your loot, and just simply go to China and occupy whatever you need to do and leave the country to the people. And let democracy resurrect to a new commitment, a new parliament, a new federal government, Release Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, release the president, and let's give democracy the oxygen that it needs in Burma to bring the beauty of freedom and rule of law, flawed as it is. But let the people live and breathe in peace and stop killing. Ming Online, go. And let the world join the civil disobedience movement until you go. From my heart to yours, stay strong, stay brave. And to the people of Burma, we grieve with the losses and we rise up with your courage.